Testing, 1, 2. Hi, everybody. Welcome to our Advent seminar on this social justice encyclicals of the church. And mostly we're doing this topic because it's so topical with our new Pope Leo. He chose the name Leo very specifically to make reference to the previous Leo, who wrote the first social justice encyclical of the church. So I'm going to talk in broad terms about what is an encyclical, what is meant by social justice. We'll dive a little bit into the first one by Pope Leo the 13th, and the situation which started, right? Why would a pope write a social justice encyclical? Well, because there was a lot of social injustice. So that's why he did that, to address it. Just a warning, social justice issues are political issues. You cannot separate it. Our society, we make laws. Every laws we make has a moral value to it. That's informed by our faith. And so, when we experience the political system as it is, a lot of people think, well, that's the way it's supposed to be. But we're getting challenged by the social justice encyclicals, and first and foremost by Jesus Christ himself. It doesn't have to be that way. We can set up our society any way we want, especially when we are in a country that we participate in the politics, in the way that we vote for people or run for office ourselves or be in contact with our representatives. You know, we are the ones who can make things change in our society. And since we have that ability, then we have the moral duty to do so in a just way. So next slide, let's talk about the encyclical. An encyclical was originally a circular letter. That's the Latin encyclical, a cycle. It's sent to all the churches of a particular area in ancient Rome. And it could be, originally, it's just any letter sent out by any bishop at any time, just as an open letter to go around. But today, the term is used much more formally for a type of letter, especially by the Pope. And in these letters, the Pope lays out the church's position. He's speaking for the church, and he's saying, this is what we believe in this situation at this time, what we should be doing, and if there's been any sort of theological back and forth about doing this or this, he's going to come and say, it's this. So it's not at the highest level of an infallible statement. It's not inerrant, that is without error like Scripture is, but it is one of the highest levels of church documents, just one little step under the documents that come from a ecumenical council like Vatican Council II. So here's the Pope coming in saying, this is what we should be doing. If you're Catholic, this is it. Next slide. So when we talk about social justice, we have to change the way we think about the word social, because most of the time we use social, it means just a informal get-together with other people. We're just going to have a social. We have a second Sunday social. But social, traditionally, is the adjective form of society. So that we're not just talking about, hey, how do we get along with each other in small groups? It's how society is structured. So when we talk about the social justice documents of the church, we should probably call it the societal encyclicals, because the encyclical is going to talk about how society should be formed. So, so this is where it really hits on public policy and law, because we're talking about the society that we live in. Next slide. And if we're talking about social justice, what do we mean by justice? This is the simplest one. St. Thomas Aquinas said, justice is the virtue of giving the person they're due what they're due. So, for example, respect. Every human being is due respect. So it is socially just to respect them. If a person has property that's taken by somebody else, it's stolen, that person is due to have their property given back. And society can step in and try to find the person who stole it and to retrieve it, and then maybe punish and give consequences to the one who stole it. So if somebody steals something from you, the just thing is for you to get your thing back because it's yours. Justice, it can be given out totally equally or unequally in special situations. So you would think that for something to be social justice, you have to treat everybody in exactly the same way. Well, not everybody is exactly the same. Some people have different needs than others. Just think about our tax policy in the United States. Federal income tax is progressive, so that people who are living under the poverty line, let's say it's $20,000 a year for a family of 4, well, they don't pay any tax. They're living in poverty. They don't have any money to give. Any money they give is less food for them to eat that they need to live. So they don't get taxed. But then at the next $10,000 of income, that may get taxed at 2%, and the next one gets taxed at 10%, and so on. Because those who are making lots of money, more money than they could use for their shelter, for food, for anything that they really need to live, that gets taxed more heavily. And that is just because those who are very poor, living in poverty, have a special need. So when we talk about equal justice, it's not always exactly the same for everybody. Some people would like it that way. In the past 30 years, we've had 2 independent candidates for president of the United States. Both of them were billionaires, and both of them wanted a flat tax because that would lower their taxes, and it would raise taxes on those who have very low income. They did not get to see the inside of the Oval Office. And the other thing that people are due are their rights. So let's talk about rights. Next slide. Rights are those things which are due to a person, and is granted by law or by custom. So our Constitution of the United States gives the right to free speech that's unencumbered by the government. So that is granted by law to us. We have free speech. The government can't censor us. The government can't keep us from talking to others. Now remember, it's unencumbered by the government. You know, if somebody comes into church and starts talking really loud while I'm giving this presentation, I'm going to call the police and they will be escorted out. It's like, wait, the police are the government. They're taking him out. They're taking away his freedom of speech. Like, oh, no. The government isn't taking away the free speech. I am, because this is private property. So yeah, always remember that free speech refers to the government. This happens a lot in the internet. Somebody says something very inflammatory online, and the moderators of wherever they are on the internet takes away their account. It's like, I have free speech. It's like, no, because the government isn't running this website. You don't have free speech here. Now, so if we're talking about justice and rights, so whatever someone has a right to, it must be given. If they don't get their right that they're due, that's injustice. So justice is giving them their rights, and it cannot be taken away. If you have a right, it cannot be taken away, unless whatever gave you that right comes along and says, we're changing things, and you don't have the right anymore. And then you have to, as a society, decide, are we going to put up with that or not? Agree with it or not? Also, a right is that which a person is due to be free from. So again, actually, free speech is that kind of right, that we're free from government interference and encumberment, not to be encumbered by our speech. Most of the rights given to us in our Constitution is this kind of right. It's like protective rights. You have a right to assembly. You can gather with every you want. The government can't come in and break it up because they don't like who's getting together. You can protest down the streets civilly, and you have a right to do that. So most of the rights are in the Constitution are there to protect us from an abuse of power by those in power. And this was the early colonial experience of having a king and not respecting their rights. So they made sure we're going to have a constitution which lists all those rights, all the things we're free from that the government can't do to us. And that's social justice. Next slide. So there's some issues with rights. So first of all, a right can be granted to a particular individual. It could be granted to a group. If it's granted to a group, then everybody who belongs to that group has that right. The source of rights, well, from people of faith, we can say it comes from God. God himself is giving us this right. I have a right to life. You can't murder me. This is divine law. Rights can also be natural, that people can look around in nature and the way the world is and human beings interact with each other and say, I think that the way that human beings, as mammals, as animals who procreate, when you procreate, you have a natural right to be in charge of the children that you bring forth into this world. That's a natural right. And rights can just simply be legal, that the law says you have this right or this group has this right. Those are legislation that's passed or just simply proclaimed by somebody in power. Say, I give you this right. And rights can sometimes be situational. You know, you have a right to free speech, but you know, the famous example, but you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. That causes everybody to stampede out and get injured. You don't have a right to do that. You don't have a right to free speech if it's planning criminal activity. So rights are situational. Other issues with rights is, well, who gets to enforce the rights? You know, is it just simply the police force, executive decisions, the judiciary, the legislation? Sometimes rights are enforced locally, informally by people. You know, when you see somebody harming another person and you step in, because that person has a right to not be abused by another person. And so there may be a crowd around and saying to the person who's hurting another person, making them stop. This brings us to who decides what is a right and what isn't a right. And I'm going to get to that later. And what criteria do we use to decide what's a right? So in order to understand rights better, let's look at rights throughout history. Next slide, please. Now, throughout all of history of human history, there's been little pockets of time when people were given certain rights because the chieftain, the king, whoever decided, I'll be good and I think everybody should have this right. Very rarely do these kind of incidences in history ever last. They come and go because the next king takes away the rights the previous king gave. So throughout history, the most important right for the people of the time was the belief that their king has a divine right to be king. So when somebody says, well, why should you, king, tell us what to do? And the king says, well, if God didn't want me to be king, he would take me away from being king. But here I am, therefore God must want me to be king, and so you have to do what I tell you to do. But this goes throughout history. In ancient empires, the Caesars and the other Alexander, they like to fancy themselves as being descendants of the gods. And so they had a divine right to be the emperor, the divine right to be the king.
Isn't it lineage?
What?
Isn't it lineage?
Well, yeah, once if I'm the king and I have all the power, and I'm getting old or dying, I'd pass it on to my family. All right. And of course, since that has been customary for literally thousands of years, whoever is the strong man, the chieftain, the king, the one who has the army, if he's able to have a son who gets old enough to take over, well, then it just gets transferred and stays in the family, because they really only care about their family and not about everybody in the kingdom. So very often these rights of kings were passed on. So in 1215, famously, is the Magna Carta. This is when there was a rebellion of barons and lords in England against the king because they felt the king was abusing their power. And the funny thing with the medieval way of having a kingdom is that the king was in charge, but only if he could get the support of all the local lords and barons. Because the local lords and barons, they're the ones who have the fighters for the army. They're the ones who can raise troops. They're the ones who can raise money, because constantly kingdoms were always warring with each other. It's like, hey, I like your kingdom, I'll take it from you. It's like, now it's a war. And it's like, oh, our neighboring king isn't looking to start a war with us, so we'll start one with him, because he's eventually going to want to take our stuff, so we'll try to take his stuff. And the history of Europe was just nonstop wars for thousands of years in the Christian era. So, so the local barons and lords tried to rein in the abuses of the king in the Magna Carta, and that really didn't last that long. Kingdoms came and went, and a lot of what was in the Magna Carta was just ignored. Then comes the Enlightenment. In the 1600s, philosophers and political writers start wondering, do we have to have kings? I mean, maybe it would be better if everybody who's part of the kingdom had a say. And maybe the people who rule can only rule because all of us people, we allow them to rule. We give them the authority to rule. And so we empower them, or we elect them, we commission them, and to rule in our name. And if we don't like the way they're ruling, we'll take them down and put somebody else up. So this completely upends what was been happening for literally 2,000 years in Europe, that, the king had a divine right. And now Enlightenment scholars are saying, yeah, I don't think it has to be that way. Maybe all of us together can decide who's going to rule, and all of us together can discuss what the rules are and what rights we have and don't have. So that literature gets out there and starts getting in the minds of especially the leaders and the thinkers and the bigwigs of history. They read these Enlightenment treatises and start thinking, yeah, we don't have to have a kingdom. We can do it in another way. Next slide. So in the 1700s came the industrial age. Peasants and serfs who were farming, where they were abused by their lords and pretty much treated as slaves, they decide they're going to go to the city and get a job there where they're not going to be treated like a slave, because they really didn't own the land. The Lord owned the land. This meant the Lord can do whatever he wants to them. It's like, abuse them, sexually assault the women. And what was the serf going to do? The Lord had an army. He could say he can kick them off the land and they'd be destitute. So they were pretty much slaves. And so let's go to the city and then we'll have some freedom. We can work in one of the factories and start saving money and not be bound to a lord. So of course the aristocracy hated this. They tried to fight against it. Then in the late 1700s, you had the American Revolution. So the Enlightenment treatises about, hey, maybe we don't need a king, was in the mind of the colonists, saying, we're far from the king, and even though we're far from the king, he's still treating us horrendously. We don't have representation. Maybe we would be even wealthier if we didn't have a king, and we took care of ourselves. And so that started the American Revolution. And then when it came time for the colonies to truly be self-ruling, they had to come up with a system of government where they didn't have a king. So how does that look like? Well, this is how they set up the three branches of government to counterbalance each other, and they put certain rights in the documents, and then they come along and say, there should be more rights. And so there's 10 amendments delineating even more rights that people should have, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and so on. So they're taking these Enlightenment ideas and putting it, and just creating a new type of society. Now remember, at the beginning I said, we're used to the way things are, and sometimes people think that that's the way it has to be. It doesn't. We can change things to make things better. And that was the revolution was a revolution not just militarily, but it was a revolution in how human beings took care of society and their self-rule and the rights that they have. Then we get to the American Civil War in the 1850s. The growth of the abolitionism movement was founded on the belief that the right of all people, any human being, doesn't matter what color their skin, they should be free and not be slaves. And that thought kept growing and growing and growing, and created the tipping point of the American Civil War. So, next slide. Also in the late 1800s, the Industrial Revolution really ramped up. Factories everywhere, the smokestacks, the coal mines. It was everything that you think of the Industrial Revolution was really the late 1800s. Cities are now densely populated. Factories mass produce things so that people have things, so their general wealth increases. Except that the factory workers were, again, treated like they were serfs, like they were slaves. 80-hour work weeks, dangerous situations, being abused by their bosses, a wage that they couldn't live on. And you may think, well, why didn't they just ask for more money? They were told, get lost, because I have this person starving to death who's willing to get paid a few cents less than you are. And so, so when you had all that labor looking for work, it was a race to the bottom. They were willing to accept less and less pay just so they had some work. So they were treated like slaves. So in the late 1800s, they had two solutions: Marxism or unions. Now, Marxism, coming from Karl Marx, was the idea that everything that's here on this planet belongs to everybody. So nobody should have private property. And so the role of the state is to own everything and then decide who gets what. And if we have the people in charge who are wise and good and willing to respect the dignity of the human person, they'll distribute it evenly, so nobody will go hungry. Problem with that is that the countries which had the Marxist socialist revolution, they really didn't stay socialist. They became communist, where there was an autocracy, where those in charge were not concerned about evenly distributing everything. They were concerned about their own power. They were concerned about empire building and wars. So in that way, socialism failed because there were no brakes on those in power who were abusing the system. And they were even worse to their own people, let alone to outsiders. So that was Marxism. And so Marxism, in people's mind, meant communism, even though it doesn't have to. I mean, for example, in Maine, here's an example of socialism in Maine. The people in Maine thought that their electrical companies were just overcharging them. And so what they did, there was a movement. They had raised money with bonds to buy out the electrical companies from their state. and then to run it as a utility owned by the state. So yeah, you don't need your utilities to be run by a private organization. They didn't redistribute the wealth of Maine to every person. It's just this one instance of the electricity. It's like, well, we all need to live on electricity. Why are we letting people profit off of it when everybody needs it? We'll run our own electrical company in our state. Yeah, so that is socialism. Social Security is socialism. The government building all our roads instead of we having to build our own roads and putting tolls on them, that's socialism. So you can have socialism with a democratic government. And socialism could be light, it could be heavy, depends on what the people want. So Marxism failed because it didn't do socialism correctly. And it was also violent. People just understood that for the people to grab all the power, all the means of production, all private property, that had to be done forcefully and violently. And so that gets condemned. So Marxism, in the eyes, especially the church, is right out. Then there's the unions. The laborers said, wait a second, we are being taken advantage of. But if we get our act together and act together as a union, we can together negotiate with the capitalists who have the capital, the money, running the factories, and to demand a higher wage, safer work conditions, and so on. And then we can organize politically and elect people who are pro-worker and who will enact laws that are for the sake of the worker and protect them. Next slide. So it is in that situation that Pope Leo wrote Rerum Novarum. That's Latin for new things, but it's subtitled Rights and Duties of Capital and Labor. So here's a pope writing about capital, labor, because it was so bad at that time. The main topics of Rerum Novarum was each person has dignity. You have to recognize the dignity of the human person. You just can't use them as a slave or as an object to make money for you. It noted the poverty and the wretched conditions of laborers and the poor. Often the laborers were the poor because they weren't being paid enough. It said that laborers have the right to form trade unions. So in the political society, you had all these people wanting monarchy back, people wanting Marxism, people wanting capitalism unrestricted by any guardrails, and you had the laborers all mixed up, very, very, very political. And the Pope says, workers have a right to form unions. So that was very much an intervention in the political life of the world. Rerum Novarum was critical of both socialism, the ultimate kind of socialism where nobody was allowed to have private property, and what's often called laissez-faire capitalism. Laissez-faire just means let do. Let it go. Do whatever you want. You'll be fine. Well, they're causing people to lose fingers and limbs in the factories. It wasn't fine at all. So, did I mess this up? Socialism. So against socialism, this is a critique from the Pope. Says, no, people are allowed to have private property. So the Pope says yes to private property. So extreme forms of socialism, which takes over everything, the Pope says, no, people have a right to private property. That was actually a long time debate in the church and society in Europe for 2,000 years, because the king claimed that everything belonged to him. And people said, well, don't we own anything at all? It's like, no, I own it all. So this was a constant debate back and forth. So it wasn't only socialism in the extreme form that was telling people you shouldn't have private property. It was the kings of Europe for 2,000 years telling people you can't have private property. But there were a lot of people, including Thomas Aquinas, who made the argument that people have a right to private property. And with regard to capitalism, Leo opposes using people as mere instruments to make money, which is what they were doing. Next slide. So in Rerum Novarum, he talks about the obligations of the state. Whatever government you form, whether you keep a monarchy, it's a constitutional monarchy, it's a constitutional democracy, whatever form of government you have, it's called the state. So the state, against socialism, affirms private property and tells the revolutionaries the violence that you're causing to overthrow governments, to impose your brand of socialism is wrong and immoral. Against capitalism, Rerum Novarum opposes using people as mere instruments to make money, and the role of the state is for the common good. The state doesn't exist to help corporations get rich. The state doesn't exist to go into eternal war. The state doesn't exist to take all your property away. The state exists for the common good of all people, everybody. Although your levels of government should work, whatever is local, remain local. You don't need the federal government deciding about what signs go up in our local town. You know, that's not the role of the federal government. You have local governments, and local governments should do the things that they do locally. You don't federalize everything. And the Rerum Novarum said the state can intervene in family life because ordinarily they would be free to do their own thing, ordinarily free to raise children how they want. But if there is some issue, if the parents aren't taking care of the children, if they're abusing the children, the state has a right to intervene. So the church has always been on the side of parents have to make decisions for their children, except when children are in danger or in harm's way, then the state can intervene. And of course, we know this as the division of youth services for when children are being abused. Next slide. So Rerum Novarum said workers have rights. The right is to be free from harm. You have to have a safe work environment, free from immoral situations. Leo didn't explain what that meant, but perhaps if your business was where you worked at was part of a crime syndicate, you know, you shouldn't be forced to help a business that is doing criminal activity. And an end to child labor. So remember, 130 years ago, children were being forced to work 40 hours weekdays, 40 hours a week in hard labor, because they had the little fingers that can get into things, and then they lose their fingers. So he was very strong that like there should be no child labor at all. And just as it's sad that there are some people in our government, elected officials, who are suggesting a return to child labor. You know, for 12 through 16 years old. Yeah, they can go to work. Rights of workers, time off. Why would a worker need time off? Well, to worship God. You know, time off on Sundays. To tend to their family. They have an obligation to their family. If they're working 80 hours a week, they don't have time for that. No more long, grueling work hours. You have to let them sleep. Yeah, they were going to work with 4 hours sleep every day. Workers have a right to a fair wage, and Leo says for a reasonable and frugal comfort. So some people say, well, why should they have any comforts at all? They should just accept any job that they can get. It's like, because you're not respecting the dignity of the human person. They're just not a cog in your machine to make money for you. Let them enjoy some comforts of life. So that means you have to give them enough money that they can enjoy the comforts of life frugally, not extravagantly, and able to have some savings. Leo doesn't mention it, but it's mentioned in other social justice encyclicals that it's noted that the rich, as they go through life, they get richer and richer and richer. And then they leave that to their children. And their children have now all this wealth, and they get richer and richer and richer. And they leave that to their children, who get richer and richer and richer. So intergenerationally, a family is doing better and better and better because they're able to pass on their savings to their next generation. But the poor can't do that. They can never get ahead because they wind up with nothing and they leave nothing. And so now you have the next generation of people in poverty. So they should get enough pay so that they can start having savings and have something to pass on to the next generation for their children. And here's a funny one. Women should work from home. Well, back in the day, concerning the conditions in a factory, and the idea that women are frail and should have special protection, and they're the ones who need to be in the home to take care of the children because you now have told them children can't be in the factories anymore. So the women and the children should be at home. So if they do any work, they should do work at home, be a washerwoman and go around doing laundry for people and getting paid for that. Now, as for the rights of employers, basically it's, you have a right for your employees not to steal from you. Period. They should put in good work. They shouldn't be taking advantage of you, just like you shouldn't be taking advantage of them. Next slide. Rerum Novarum doesn't use the phrase preferential option for the poor. Today we use that phrase a lot. It developed very much in the 70s with Latin American theologians who were dealing with their countries, which was so much in poverty, but being run by very rich aristocrats and autocrats. And so they would point out, when we look at Jesus and who he reached out to, he reached out purposely to the poor, to the lowly, to the meek, saying that actually they're blessed. Meanwhile, those who are rich, well, they may not get into heaven if they don't use their riches to help others. So seeing how Jesus went out of his way to prefer to be with these people who are ordinarily marginalized by society, they came up with the phrase preferential option for the poor. Now, this made some people's heads spin because it sounds like, oh, you're going back to socialism. But again, not all socialism is bad if you still allow for private property. But anyway, Leo says this. He doesn't say that phrase, but he plants the seed for it. God himself seems to incline rather to those who suffer misfortune. For Jesus Christ calls the poor blessed. He lovingly invites those in labor and grief to come to him for solace. And he displays the tenderest charity toward the lowly and the oppressed. So in regard to the rich and poor, Leo also says, the richer class have many ways of shielding themselves and stand less in need of help from the state, whereas the mass of the poor have no resources of their own to fall back upon and must chiefly depend upon the assistance of the state. And it is for this reason that wage earners, since they mostly belong in the mass of the needy, should be specially cared for and protected by the government. So he isn't saying preferential option for the poor, but basically that's it. Because remember I said rights can be situational. They don't have to be given out exactly the same for everybody, because people are in different situations. If people have plenty, they don't need extra aid. People with nothing, they need aid. So the poor have a right to be taken care of by society in a way that the rich don't get. And sometimes you hear people who very, very well and comfortable in their life complain about what's given to those who live in poverty. saying, well, I don't get that either. It's not fair. Well, rights can be situational. And Jesus' outreach to people was to prefer to be with those who are marginalized. Whenever he was with the power people in society, he often criticized them and chided them for their behavior. Whereas the lowly of the world, he says, come to me who are meek and weary, I will give you rest. Next slide. So, this is one of the 13 encyclicals on social justice that have come out in the past 150 years. I am not going to summarize all the other ones because we don't have time. If you do want to know what all the other ones say, the Wikipedia article is a great summary of what each one of them say. But the major areas that gets developed throughout the centuries fall into these categories. First, the dignity of the human person. Every person has inherent worth that must be respected, regardless of race, religion, gender, or economic status. The common good. Social conditions that allow all people to reach their human potential are what we are looking for. So we want everybody to be able to reach their potential and should work towards that. Solidarity. The virtue of standing with the poor and vulnerable, recognizing that we are all members of one human family. That's somebody's? Okay. I thought St. Catherine was talking to me again. Yeah, so, we stand with the poor and vulnerable. The idea of solidarity especially comes up in John Paul II's encyclicals because of that movement in Poland, that solidarity was the movement to people stand together to tell the people who are running them, we don't want you to run us anymore because you're not respecting us. So the movement was solidarity. Subsidiarity, as mentioned before, the principle that matters ought to be handled by the smallest, lowest, or least centralized competent authority. We don't need to federalize, whether or not we could put a garden gnome in our yard. That's for a local concern. Preferential option for the poor and vulnerable. Decisions must be evaluated from the perspective of the poor and marginalized. And stewardship of creation, which is kind of new. Was mentioned by some of the popes throughout the century, but of course Francis he gave an encyclical all about environmental justice. So we have to have respect for God's creation, which now includes the call for integral ecology. Next slide. So briefly to go through what each of the encyclicals were. In 1891, Leo XIII, Rerum Novarum, what we just went through. In 1931, Quadragesimo Anno, which is Latin for the 40th year. So 40 years after Rerum Novarum, Pius XI wrote Quadragesimo Anno, subtitled On the Reconstruction of Social Order. So it confirms and develops its teachings, expanding the principles of subsidiarity and social justice. Basically saying what Leo said, ditto. 1961, Mater et Magistra, which is Latin for mother and teacher, subtitled On Christianity and Social Progress. So here is St. John the 23rd, the year before he calls Vatican Council II, putting out this. It applies Catholic social teaching to agricultural issues. Imagine the Pope being concerned about agriculture issues. But the source of food in the world, and people going hungry. So it's like, who is producing the food and why isn't it getting it to those who are hungry? So he addresses the unequal distribution of wealth between nations and the need for greater worldwide aid and cooperation for the common good. Next slide. Pacem in terris. This is the highlight because This was a year after John the 23rd started Vatican Council II, and this is the first encyclical written not to Catholics, but to the whole world. It was about peace and justice. So he focuses on human rights and duties between individuals, public authorities, and nations, and calls for a global structure that respects these rights and advocates for the outlawing of war. The New York Times printed the entire encyclical, and it's one of the few encyclicals that the UN keeps in its library, because it was very, very influential. Because this is the Cold War, and children are taught to hide underneath their desks because of a nuclear attack. So the idea of the Pope addressing, we need peace, and we need to put structures in place for that peace. 1967, Paul VI writes Populorum Progressio on the development of peoples. And he emphasizes integral human development, economic, social, cultural, and spiritual, and addresses the widening gap between rich and poor nations. That's a common theme. But he talks about the human person as dignity. So all the aspects of human life needs to be addressed. Economic, social, cultural, and spiritual. Imagine having a right to culture, to museums and artwork, and be able to be taught how to do that. It's from this encyclical that we have a famous phrase where he says, if you want peace, work for justice. Because injustice is the heart of most wars. Then we get to St. John Paul II, 1981, Laborum Exercens on human work. Again, he reaffirms the dignity of human work, stressing that labor has priority over capital. Work is viewed as essential for human dignity and participation in creation. In 1991, 10 years later, on the 100th anniversary of Rerum Novarum, so that's Centissimus Annus, the 100th year, St. John Paul II was written for the centenary of the Rerum Novarum. It analyzes the collapse of communism, critiques consumerism, and discusses the role of the state and the market economy in a just society. A lot of the things which Rerum Novarum did, but over the years, so many rights have been granted. It's like, well, we can keep going and do more. In 2009, we have Caritas in Veritate, Charity and Truth, on integral human development in charity and truth. And this is Benedict XVI. Focuses on global development, the environment, and the need to link charity with truth in all economic and social activity. By the way, whenever the church uses the word charity, it doesn't mean helping the poor. It means love. It comes from the Latin caritas. I wish our liturgy would stop using the word charity when they simply mean love. It's like, we have a word for love, it's love. And we have a word for helping those who need, it's charity. Next slide, 2015, we just mentioned it earlier, Laudato Si. Nobody knows what that means, except for Francis. He uses some old Italian phrase, praise be to you, on care of our common home. And so he centers on the environment and the concept of integral ecology, linking social justice for the poor with environmental stewardship. So what does social justice for the poor have to do with the environment? Well, he notes that when we have ecological disasters, it hurts the poor the most. They don't have the means to fortify their homes. They don't have the means to hop in a car and head inland and stay at a hotel for a week. They don't have the means to rebuild their house that was taken away in a flood. If the seas are rising, the rich people can move inland because they have the means to do that. The poor can't. And at this point, it should be pointed out that these encyclicals are looking at the worldwide condition, because we forget just how poor other countries are and how many people are living in poverty. And then in 2020, Fratelli Tutti, Brothers All, on fraternity and social friendship. Francis calls for a global vision of fraternity and social friendship, opposing the culture of walls and advocating for a just and inclusive society where all are respected. What could have motivated Francis to say, hey, let's be nicer to each other? Well, in the past 20 years, our discourse has become very coarse and full of just being mean and awful and rotten and yelling and screaming and being dishonest. And here's Francis saying, can't we just all be friends and be nice with each other and not do that? Because what you're doing is making things worse. Don't you see that? So that's his take on that. And so that concludes, I went through that before. So we can leave that up there. Thank you, Tom. Your work is done. Let's hear it for Tom. Any questions or comments? Yes. Well, we have lots and lots of outreach, local parishes, dioceses, national groups, international groups. Oh yeah, volunteer. Volunteer, volunteer, volunteer. And yes, it's in the bulletin every week. If you want to help financially for international situations of war, drought, floods, disasters, the Catholic Relief Services. But if you want to donate for something that's happening domestically in the United States, then it's the Catholic, what's that? Catholic Charities. Yeah, that's where that word charity now means charity for real. Well, I bet, he is going to come up with his own social justice encyclical for the. What's that? He did? I missed it. Oh. Was it labeled a social justice? Oh, okay. I don't think it was an encyclical, just. There we go. His agenda and priorities. You could tell he's writing a rough draft for his. Yeah, well, he chose Leo, who started the whole social justice Catholic teachings. So you can bet he will be writing a social justice encyclical to address the needs of the modern world. Oh, you mean the government state?
Yeah, when you say state.
That is mandated by the state of New Jersey. And Board of Education is totally separated from.
Well, the decision that children should be educated is made by the people we elect to make the law that says the children should be educated. But because we also believe that parents have, the rights over, what their children learn, we also allow homeschooling because the rights of parents is respected in that regard.
That doesn't get enough support. If homeschooling got enough support as.
Right.
If homeschooling does not get enough support of the Board of Education.
Well, homeschooling has pros and cons.
Correct, 100%, yeah.
You know, there's some people I know, I would never want them to be teaching their own children a curriculum or you know,
100%.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we've been, struggling with that. We talk about it in school, we were
Yeah. There's pros and cons to both.
And that's activism is by getting
up in the Board of Education, and you can voice your opinion.
No, it takes place in Advent. I'm sorry if you were misled. Well, as we go through Advent, especially for the daily readings, we come across all these social justice prophets, Hosea, some parts of Isaiah, you know, where their ideal for to get their kingdom back would be a king who is just, because all their other kings were rotten and sinned. So they would hope for a son of justice to come, someone who can restore their relationship with God and not just be a tyrant. The idea of social justice goes back to the prophets, and Jesus picks up a lot of what they said in his teachings. And then for the next 2,000 years, a lot of Christians just put their fingers in their ears and not listen to all the social justice teachings of Jesus and the prophets. I mean, I didn't put it in, but as an example of that, I was just thinking about it. You know, we talked about the American Civil War, but, you know, just within 10 years, you know, Reconstruction was dismantled, and the South was allowed to treat the former slaves with discrimination, with terrorism, disenfranchise them from voting, you know, and then then try to gaslight everybody by saying, oh, that was our old Southern culture. You know, it's not racism. And it's like, you're trying to gaslight us. We know what this war was all about and what you tried to do for the next 3 generations to keep them downtrodden and out of power. And so in the mid-1960s, we had the Rights Act, Civil Rights Act, which was supposed to criminalize all forms of discrimination. It wasn't, what? Yeah, right, and the Voting Act, right. It wasn't until 1977 that Congress passed a law to stop redlining. Redlining is what both the federal government and real estate people did to designate which neighborhoods are black, they said which are poor. No, they weren't going to say they're not going to say that part out loud, but they're saying which are poor and which are rich. The rich ones we'll loan money to so they can buy housing. But this neighborhood here, their median income is so low, we're not going to give them a loan. But it was simply because they were black. And the reason why there was a neighborhood of mostly black people who were poor was because of the past 100 years of persecution and discrimination. So it wasn't until 1977 that was outlawed. You know, we would think, with the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, you know, all those things were gone. That went on for another 10 years before a law was passed to stop it. So we got to watch the laws that they're creating. Anything else?
bulletin, and I'm assuming the website will probably have.
Mostly the bulletin. The website points to the bulletin. Maybe, probably. We just have to find a time and space for it, because we just finished the faith sharing groups. We didn't want to do two things at the same time. And the same thing in the spring is the Lenten faith sharing groups. So maybe sometime in the Easter season we can do this.
There's a lot of things you can ask about, even what's called miracle. We're gonna welcome, booklet.
So I'm still going through RCI. I am very, I choose CC, so I wasn't born with it.
Oh, right.
So I'm going through it.
I see, so are you going through it, so this Easter, or? That's good. Exactly. But if anyone else is interested, then there's lots of things for you.
I'm really going through it. Thank you.
No, right, and, the St. Rodriguez is very strong about it.
That's what's closest to us.
It's in the fall, which is
Yeah.
a good one.
And what's fun for me is I come here Sunday morning, and so I get one service, RCIA, and then I go to San Berkeley right after. And there's lingual service. And my kids have CCB, and they're in the choir, and we show up there, so I love it.
Do you ever go to the Filipino Christmas?
Yeah, so we've never missed one since we've.
They're quite special.
They're having me on the December 20th service to Our Father and Hail Mary in Arabic. I speak 6 languages. So words snuck out, my son talks a lot. They're like, hey, we need you to do, I was like, well, as you know, I'm RCIA, I'm still new. They're like, again, thank you for.
Thank you.
You guys did the tip of an iceberg and a huge conversation on each. On each thing, There's a lot to cover,
If you want to go, go. If you want to talk to me some more, stay and talk some more.
It was a great topic. Great topic.
Thank you all.